you to start the recording now. You read my mind. Recording in progress. Because this meeting is going to be recorded, we are going to have a breakout session a little bit later on that won't be recorded, but the bulk of this is going to be recorded, and then we're going to put it up on our website, and I'll send the link out after as well to everyone. So thanks for being here today. I know people are entering the waiting room, so just kind of getting into the meeting. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your lunch hour or a little bit more than an hour with us today. And we're going to hear from South Island Prosperity Partnership and be inspired by the work that they're doing, and you know, maybe bring a piece of what they're doing into your work, or you know, apply it in some way, shape, or form. So the one thing I wanted you to do too is people are joining, and I'm talking and you're listening, please feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat, because I really want people to be able to make connections at this event, at every event that I host. I mean, the pandemic has allowed us to do some really interesting things with bringing people from all over together. I probably wouldn't have met Elysia and Kier outside of the pandemic, but I am able to because we can host these sessions. But the one thing that's missing is connection. You just don't, I mean, people just kind of come and go through a webinar and you don't connect afterwards. So please, if you feel comfortable, put your name and where you're from in the chat. And hey, like, put your LinkedIn profile too. I'll put mine in, connect with me after. I'd love to connect with as many of you as possible. And okay, thanks so much. I see people are putting in the chat. Okay, cool. So welcome to our first of our regional Synergies webinar series. We are Co-operatives First, and Trista Biwapaskonias and myself, Heather Hallgrimson, are your hosts for this webinar today. And we also have Kyle White joining us, doing all of the Zoom tech things. And I'm so grateful for that, because it is a lot of work to do. Put people in breakout rooms, spotlight videos, et cetera, without some help. So always thankful for help. We're real big on the team approach here. Obviously, we promote cooperatives. So, and if this is your first event with Co-operatives First, I want to say a big welcome. We're really glad to meet you. Our organization is a business development organization that supports people in developing cooperative businesses. Specifically, we do this in rural and First Nations or Indigenous communities across Western Canada. So if you are interested in hearing more about cooperatives and the work that we do, please just follow us on any of our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or reach out by email afterwards. You should have all of our email addresses, or at least mine. So, you know, talk about co-ops. Now, that's kind of where the discussion stops when it comes to co-ops. And I'll just explain why. I mean, we really want to focus on collaborative, local, win-win solutions, and people who have captured those for themselves to get something done. Now, that could be a co-op or it could not be a co-op. In this case, South Island Prosperity Partnership isn't a co-op, but we're not going to begrudge them for that. It is local, it is resilient, and it is collaborative. And, you know, a co-op could be part of that solution, a co-op could be that solution. It's all connected. And so I just, you know, I want to, let's leave that where it is. But I really just want to share that that's why we're hosting these events, because we want to inspire people to think about what they could do with what they already have going on and create more value. So whether that's a co-op or not, if it's a co-op, talk to me. I want to hear about it. Okay, cool. So everyone is muted as we're in a group here, but I want you to know how to unmute yourself, because we're going to go in breakout rooms later. So I don't think we have any background noise going on, which is perfect. Before we really get rolling here, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements in the age of virtual sessions are always a bit interesting, because I can't possibly acknowledge the land that everyone is on. I could, but we might be here all day. But I would like to acknowledge the land that I am on right now, which is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And this event is Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree people and the homeland of the Métis. So if you know the land acknowledgement from where you are, I just invite you to share that as well if you would like, or to just consider it right now to acknowledge the land that you're on. Okay, so on to our hour today. So here's what to expect. We're going to start off with a presentation from Kier and Elysia, who are from South Island Prosperity Partnership, and they're going to tell us a little bit more about South Island Prosperity Partnership. This is going to be like a PowerPoint presentation. They'll share it with us. It'll give you some background on what it's all about and just kind of center us all in what they're doing. And then after that, we're going to move into a panel. And so Trista and I, Kieran and Alicia will come onto the panel. We'll ask some questions, get some conversation going back and forth and dig a little bit deeper. After the panel, we're going to be going into breakout rooms. So I'm inspired by, okay, in-person events, I guess. I'm remembering the days of in-person events. Let's say that. I'm hearkening. And when you go to an in-person event, you go to the keynote or what have you, and then after that you choose your own breakout session. So I noticed a lot of breakout rooms, people just get put in breakout rooms, and then it's kind of like, okay, we're all talking about the same thing. But this time you're going to choose. Okay, so when the breakout rooms open, you're going to choose the topic that you want to go to, and there's going to be somebody hosting that room. Now their job isn't to present to you, it's just to sort of take notes, to do the technical stuff. They're prepped and ready on the technical details. Okay, so we're going to have 4 different topics, and those are kind of range from like, I just want to learn how to start a conversation. I'm so, I want to learn how to, I'm at the beginning, let's just say. So you can be at the beginning with me, or you can be talking about governance and boards with Kyle, or you can be talking about setting goals and visioning with Trista, or you can be talking about kind of that ongoing communication, reinforcing value. And I believe we're going to put Alicia and Kira in that room, unless Kira, you can be like, I mean, you're a free agent. You can go to whichever room you want, pick your room. Maybe you want to go to the board one because you're on the board, right? So who knows? Okay, cool. So that's enough preamble. I would like to invite Trista, my co-host, up into the spotlight and to introduce our guests today.
Okay, thank you, Heather, and I'm excited to meet everybody. So I'd like to introduce Alicia Glover, Manager of Strategic Partnerships of South Island Prosperity Partnership and Care Petra. Sorry, board member of the South Island Prosperity Partnership. Alicia was born and raised in Victoria, BC, a proud alumni of the United World College of Southeast Asia and Vassar College. She has lived, worked, and studied in Singapore, Cambodia, and the US. With experience in the nonprofit and political realm, she is committed to working with communities to co-develop solutions that improve well-being. Prior to working with the South Island Prosperity Partnership, Alicia was the Executive Director of Community Micro Lending. Kier is the Director of Indigenous Relations for QM Environmental, a leading environmental and industrial services company. Previous to joining QM, Kier was Principal Relationship Manager of Gui Engineering Limited. Kier is Métis Chinese born and raised in the Canadian prairies. His family was very involved in both these communities, and these connections remain important to him. He has lived in Victoria since 2012 and is passionate about seeing the South Island region grow. A graduate of the Civil Engineering Department at the University of Victoria, Kier has continued on to pursue a master's degree researching Aboriginal housing and community sector use. He also holds a business diploma from the Institute of Applied Science and Technology, specializing in human resources. Alicia and Kier are going to give us some background on what SIPP does and how the partnership came to be.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to the Co-operatives First team for inviting us to join you today. Thank you, Trista, and thank you, Heather and Kyle. I really appreciate it. And thank you all who are joining the conversation today. So yes, my name is Alicia Glover, and I have been introduced, but I am still the Manager of Strategic Partnerships. I was also a member of the Inclusive Economy Committee that we'll be talking about today. And today I'm joining from the territories of the Lekwungen peoples, today known as the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations. Kier?
Yeah, my name is Kier Portress. I'm the Director of Indigenous Relations, so I think maybe we just missed that on the slide there. I'm the Director of Indigenous Relations for QM Environmental. And yeah, I grew up in Regina, actually, and I've spent lots of time in Saskatoon and other parts of the country, but mainly out out west here in BC, and just a board member with SIPP.
So today we hope to bring you to the South Island and to tell you a bit more about the South Island Prosperity Partnership, our approach, how we've gone about building relationships and then activating those relationships, looking at the example of the Rising Economy Task Force, our region's economic response to COVID-19. And then looking forward, looking at one of the projects that emerged from that work, the Indigenous Prosperity Center, and just the role of relationships in activating this project. Finally, we'll close with some learnings that we've had over the last few years and some invitations to hopefully support our conversation later today. So to understand the South Island South Island Prosperity Partnership really is to understand the region that we serve. Greater Victoria is one economic region with many governments, including 10 First Nations, 13 municipalities, and a regional government, the Capital Regional District. The region had the slowest recovery from the 2008 financial crisis, and it was recognized that a different approach was needed to avoid a race to the bottom amongst all of these governments. So a group came together to found what was initially the South Island Prosperity Project, founded as a nonprofit in 2016. Not a cooperative, but maybe a collaborative nonprofit. And it used a collaborative model that was based on the Halifax Partnership. Funding was based on a municipal per capita funding model that was supported by different categories of membership. And key to the formation of this nonprofit was an intention to work with First Nations from the beginning. The organization was set up with a governance approach of one member, one vote. And this was key in building trust with not only smaller municipalities and First Nations, but industries and post-secondary partners as well. This idea that all our members are equal. And as a public-private partnership, our structure really allowed us to operate as a third party, which gave us the freedom to work around a lot of the structures that may have slowed down collaboration in the past, and to really embrace that ambiguity and an approach that recognizes that we really are stronger when we work together, and to create that kind of third space that made that possible. Other impacts was that we could focus on a vision for the region that went beyond the election cycles and really look to longer term visions and over quick fixes. And we could also really work through relationships first. So, by kind of stepping, to the side of many of the other requirements of how other governments, needed to work across and, work with each other, we were able to, create a third space essentially for new conversations to happen. And, overall, this again just created an environment that supports collaboration and innovation results when folks feel safe to collaborate and safe to step into those more creative conversations. And thanks to this model, our alliance has grown. So currently we have over 70 public and private sector partners across the region. And like most AcDev agencies, our work includes FDI and company attraction, global branding, events and thought leadership and workforce development. We also provide business retention and expansion support as requested. So, supply chain issues for, say, bottles for a salad dressing company, or, 3D printing, just supporting the network and connecting with the resources they need to solve problems so that their businesses continue to operate and support the community. But another emerging strength of ours is providing that project development support to help get complex projects off the ground. So, we created that third space, and especially as we'll talk about later on, it's really allowing us to bring folks together, different stakeholders together, rights holders together to to get otherwise complex projects off the ground. One example is an ocean innovation hub and cluster that includes, reflects the diversity of our membership to build an ocean clean tech cluster out here on the island. And the second, which we'll dive into in more depth shortly, is the Indigenous Prosperity Center, which is bringing together South Island First Nations to collaborate and pursue, shared economic prosperity.
Yeah, and a big part
here. Perfect. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, and a big part of the way that SIPP works is to make those connections with, Indigenous communities. And the way that we did that was through investing time and resources and dedicating a person to lead those that initial engagement. It's a full-time staff part of the process, which actually, that's how you build those relationships, right? It's not, cycling or having 16 people do, the job one. It's just having that one dedicated person. And then resource membership fees to be able to remove those barriers for communities that aren't able to, pay the full membership. And one of the ways that we did this was through the Indigenous Prosperity Gathering in November of 2019. And that's where this graphic was created with, speakers and everyone who showed up and had those discussions. And one of the big things is just recognizing that First Nations have unique goals and are partners in the region, just like any of the other municipalities or industries here. In some ways, they might even have a stronger claim to those areas, right? And recognizing them as partners and not just a barrier. And also respecting that, right? And many of these communities already have economic development opportunities, maybe even economic development officers. And just recognizing and respecting that they're growing in their own ways as well. And that SIPP was an opportunity to bring them into that collaboration. And then just provide, support when requested, or putting out those invites so they're at the table. And the next slide here, so this shows all the nations in the area. I'm actually on the board of the Métis Nation Greater Victoria, and so having all these communities put together under SIPP, again, gives them voice to economic development in the region and this collaboration, and gives them an opportunity to network and find greater, opportunities where on their own it might be a little bit more difficult.
Thanks, Kier. So now we'd like to share with you an example of how we really activated the relationships to support resilience, which I'm sorry to do, but brings us back to 2020. And the Rising Economy Task Force and Reboot Report, which is our region's response to the economic impacts of COVID-19. So the purpose of the task force was really to avoid duplication, and SIPP and its members identified the need for a strong regional coordination of this work. I was actually at the meeting before I worked with SIPP, where the City of Victoria was, and their business support call was considering, do we need a task force? We need to respond to what's happening, what we're seeing on the ground, and we need to identify quick actions. And and essentially the choice was, do we go it alone as a city, or do we think as a region? And the decision, was unanimous that we need to work together. We share an economy, so let's work together. And I think that was a pivotal moment early on in the pandemic. And so really it was this idea that, again, we're stronger together, and so let's work together. So we mobilized members and additional folks to form the Rising Economy Task Force and launched that in April 16th, 2020. This is a rough timeline of the process for the task force and the resulting report. So again, April, we brought together 40 leaders from 3 levels of government: First Nations, private sector, NGOs, and the post-secondary institutions. 10 sector committees were formed, each leading their own impact analysis and engaging in engagement and outreach with their communities. In August 2020, committees then released their independent reports containing 160 plus recommendations and a summary of their findings of the impact of COVID-19 on the economic impact of COVID-19 in their communities. And then September and October, these recommendations and findings were reviewed by a task force working group, who then worked also with an external support to identify 40 recommendations within 10 recovery pillars to support, response. So that short-term actions, recovery, kind of more medium-term actions, and then any actions that would support the longer-term resilience of the region and the region as a whole. So not just certain sectors or communities, but really a holistic view of, everyone who was a part of this region's economy. And then November 2020, I'm laughing because by this time I was working for SIPP, so it was a very busy month, but we released the final reboot report, which summarized these recommendations. And then, why not? We also threw a conference, but it was an opportunity to gather online and bring together, just create another more public space for folks to engage with the core themes of Reboot and to remind each other to, that just of the wealth of experience and creativity and ingenuity really that are in this region. So that happened also concurrently with the launch of Rising Economy Week. So in addition, this is a list of our committees, and I just want to highlight that in addition to the more traditional sector committees, we had 2 committees that were focused on the economic response and recovery needed to support particularly impacted communities. So this included the Inclusive Economy Committee, which I actually joined when I was still with Community Microlending, which really focused on both the social sector, but also particularly impacted people across sectors. As well as the Indigenous Economy Committee, which we're going to dive into a bit more here today. And again, this is the cover page for Reboot and the plan that really included the 40 recommendations. And you'll see with the titling, it's Greater Victoria's Economic Recovery Plan, and that, not just one municipalities, et cetera, but this truly was a regional response. So where are we now? We can leave 2020 and currently where South Island Prosperity Partnership is focused is looking at, we're currently developing several of the initiatives that were in Reboot, including a key initiative identified by the Indigenous Economy Committee, which I'll turn it over to Kier to walk us through and how it came to be.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. So a major finding of this Indigenous Economic Committee was to highlight sort of the need for diversity and economic resilience with Indigenous communities. And to achieve this, looking at leveraging the unique arts and culture of communities, better integrating Indigenous businesses and the young and growing workforce, because we all know that Indigenous communities are growing, population-wise, growing faster than non-Indigenous, and also increased sharing of best practices. With a lot of communities, especially in a region our size, there's 9 Indigenous communities. So, having, instead of necessarily 9 totally independent, reinventing the wheel all the time, how do you share those resources to help streamline those community efforts? And I think that's the biggest thing here, is creating those opportunities to do that and actually putting rubber to the road per se. And then so in this reboot, it was to invest in inclusion. And it was to incubate and spin off a regional Indigenous economic development office on the South Island. There's a lot of reasons for that, not just because it's good to include Indigenous people, but there are very real opportunities with nations, with federal RFP processes and mandated mandated spends for Indigenous communities and businesses and peoples. And so having that coordinated effort in this area, I think we're going to kind of be a leader in that in many senses. And the task force recognized the impact of this recommendation on the region and included it in the reboot plan because, you know, it's a great idea. And people like Alicia and other staff within SIPP are able to really move that forward, where often, you know, Indigenous communities, it's on the side of somebody's desk or it's with somebody who's doing 10 things already. And so having staff help support this with the nations, I think is a great way to really make it have some real grip. And then, so this is where the IPC was born. The vision, you know, the Indigenous Prosperity Center was really to augment and amplify that Indigenous economy, if you will, and workforce. So from this, we specifically are kind of targeting an enhanced cooperative and communication amongst these communities, coordinating joint initiatives. So like I was saying earlier, on procurement bids and/or training. As a Métis person, you know, often we're supporting Indigenous, urban Indigenous people. And, you know, again, having that coordinated effort so that it's not just going directly to one community and leveraging that type of funding and those types of relationships for everyone in the region, I think is important. Upskilling and leadership training through micro-credentialing programs. So anyone who's, I guess, in the education industry will probably have heard of micro-credentialing. So this is just creating really short courses that are recognized by, you know, a third party. So you do get a credential after but it could be as short as like a 2-week course. And what happens is that really provides those opportunities for young people to get into areas that they may not have been able to get into before, or to get funding to take courses to enable them to get to that next level. Another piece was identifying and pursuing procurement opportunities. So creating that funnel through the IPC so that Indigenous communities can identify and work with the IPC or work with their partners to more effectively get those procurement opportunities. Because really, you know, for a lot of economic development officers within communities, it's like drinking from a fire hose. So even if you can create that funnel and, you know, get 1 or 2 drips out of it, because that's what your capacity allows, at least you can get those 1 or 2 drips instead of, you know, I need to avoid that because I just don't have the capacity. And then the other side was to design and launch a centralized employment agency. So it's a similar thing where, you know, many communities are effectively tracking their populations, training and education opportunities. But the other side of that is, as a region, if you had one central spot for that, then you can actually alleviate some of that work off some of those communities if they choose to, or at least coordinate them so that they, you know, you don't have to go to each 9 communities to say, hey, you know, who do you have? You could go to that central spot and coordinate through that.
Thank you. So 10:29, I'll see if we can wrap in a minute. Just mindful, Heather, of the timeline. So currently, the work to date, 10 South Island First Nations have been invited to direct the governance of the IPC, along with the Victoria Native Friendship Center, the Métis Nation of Greater Victoria, and SIPP, which will be incubating the center, incubating it with the vision to spin it off. We've completed phase 1, which is securing initial pilot funding. and producing an initial business plan, really to hone in on those activation projects to, to demonstrate that this is going to be valuable, because, time is precious. And we're about to embark on phase 2, which is looking for partners to get these projects off the ground, while also building further relationships with First Nations, to better understand their priorities, capacity gaps, and opportunities to collaborate. So kind of 2 strokes, showing success with early partners while keeping that communication and relationship building going. So just to wrap up, some learning and invitations, and we can get into this probably more in the panel as well, but just, what worked. I think having those relationships existing beforehand made it a lot easier to reach out, in the time of crisis. We knew who we were. We knew okay, let's at least communicate. And having some structures for communicating was also helpful. Having those independent committee reports was important. It helped us move a lot faster by letting them work independently. And it brought forward kind of solutions we never would have thought of, as our own. And I really tying it into other initiatives. So it's not either or, it's both and. One task force cannot do anything, no matter how many people are there. And so there were other municipalities that had their own efforts, or different sectors that had their efforts, and really the goal was to convene and amplify.
Yeah, and some of those lessons learned as well as to continue building those relationships, right? Just because you have it doesn't mean that it's always going to be there. And that also helps ensure staff are working together. So identifying the right people who should be working together through those relationships. It also helps to streamline systems, right? So if you know how people work and you know what systems they're using, it makes it that much easier. And really, funding can be tough because this is cross-jurisdictional work. It's federal, it's provincial, it's municipal, it's Indigenous, non-Indigenous, unreserved, off-reserve. And so one of the big things with the next steps here is, we really want to push that IPC and see where we can go with that. And we are going, we're kind of moving through that really well right now. We're going to continue being that third party so that, we're that meeting place, and engaging the region, right? And continuing to build that experience together, I think is probably the most important part there.
Yeah, our invitation, I think, Keir, the first bullet is from you. So just do
that's
it.
Right. You gotta just do it. And that's,
don't tell Nike, but
yeah. And I come from Saskatchewan, where co-ops and stuff like this, people know that working together works and needs to happen, right? I find that the more out west you go or out east, that doesn't happen as much. But I working together is super important.
And I added the second one, and especially as a non-Indigenous person, to other non-Indigenous people joining this call, embrace humility and embrace that journey of continuous learning. You will never be finished learning, and you'll never be finished unlearning. So, just embrace it and don't let that get in the way of building what could be fantastic friendships as well as relationships. And then, back to the procedural stuff is, develop those systems to improve collaboration and really trust, even when things are tricky or kind of uncertain, that strength comes from collaboration.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of other sort of organizations out there kind of linking people and doing that. And I think once you start doing it, you'll start learning what's out there and getting those resources and tools together. And then, creating those tools internally, I think are super important for sure.
That's it. 4 minutes over time, but thank you everyone for your attention. And I'm excited for the next part of this webinar.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really enjoyed your presentation and the overview. It's as I was listening, I just kept seeing the connections between co-ops. Although you guys are not a co-op, I just seeing the one member, one vote, and having the membership being very a part of it and reflective of everybody's needs. So I'm really glad you guys are here and presenting to us. So I just want to kick it off here. And so, I know that it was a really good presentation, but kind of admitted, what is your role? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis for the South Island Prosperity Partnership?
Yeah, I can take that one first. So it's a great question. I mean, Manager of Strategic Partnerships is not a very clear title. So functionally, day to day, I provide essentially project coordination and communication support. I'm the one who's reaching out to the various folks who are involved in projects and making sure that they're getting the communication, like everyone knows what's going on. They have I mean, down to the details of calendar invites and scheduling, and making sure, you know, folks have what they need to come together and do the work of collaborating. So that's that piece. I also do that for our major projects like the Indigenous Prosperity Center and for Coast, and then also as requested by communities. So for example, I'm working with Synergies Leadership Council to support their development of different economic development and workforce opportunities for their members. And, you know, essentially that comes through a meeting. We have a standing meeting every 2 weeks, and it's like, hey, we're interested in procurement training, you know, please go learn more about that or find out help us figure this out, essentially. And I say, yes, thank you, put me to work. And I go out and do the research. So check in with all the post-secondary partners, do a survey of the funding opportunities out there that could resource this, and also work with Synergies to figure out the needs assessment. So what's their vision for members? What are the non-negotiables? You know, what do you want them to be able to do after this program, et cetera? So, and then just help to bring together the pieces so that, you know, a collaborative project can be activated and go and happen. So, yeah, it's a lot of emails, it's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of listening. It's, you know, it's a lot of kind of carrying multiple threads so that folks who've got many other things going on can continue to come together and develops different projects, ideas, visions, etc.
And I'm a board member, so Alicia does all the
here. That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I think for me, it's about guiding and being part of that I guess steering of initiatives and programming and stuff like that, and being, you know, and kind of helping generate some of those ideas, but also not, you know, I've got a full-time 9 to 5. I also do consulting on the side and teaching at UVic. So I don't have a lot of the horsepower time to take on the work of, you know, SIPP. And so the way that they've structured SIPP creates a very productive and effective model to reach that role. And I think that's where, like, creating that structure is super important from day one, and you know, looking at what that looks like, and then you build it off that, right? And there's different models for different times. You can grow out of a model and come back to it. And on a lot of this stuff, it's, especially the Indigenous side, it's you know, it's evolving, but I think in a really effective way because of the way it's structured. And I saw some other questions. So I saw one from Patricia, actually. I don't know if she meant to put it out to everybody or put it out to me specifically, but asking about how the process to engage First Nations was involved, whether it was with Chief and Council or ECDEV or business development. And I think it's different for every community. So some communities who do have an ECDEV officer, you know, I think that was sort of the approach of SIPs, but I think it's up to the community, and being an economic development organization, if you will, it was really focused at that ECDEV side. So figuring out who that person is, and then you know, getting in front of chief and council, you know, showing them, you know, what the approach was going to be. But really, you know, that's why that relationship, that direct relationship, super important, because it's not always apparent who you should be talking to, you know. I don't know.
Before we get to, before we, no, I was gonna say, I think before, there's a lot of good questions, but Tristan, Heather, this is your this is your panel. So what would you like to ask us next?
I always prepare questions, but the questions
like,
coming
these
from
are
the audience
great.
are like fantastic. So actually, I'm gonna, away I go with questions that I asked. I'm going to ask some questions for this. It's just like it's fantastic. So I'm going to ask Jennifer's question actually because I think it speaks to something that I wanted to ask as well, which is about cross-jurisdictional work is complex. So I did write down in my notes too about complexity, and I think when it comes together, we're talking cooperative, we're talking a partnership, we're talking about people who have different goals. It's like there's something in marrying all of those visions towards one central vision that's hard work, and it's ongoing work, and it's constantly reinforcing. So can you talk a little bit about, and I know Jennifer's question is specifically cross-jurisdictional, but I think I'll just focus on like, you know, cross-organizational. Like again, it's just people with different goals, motivations, ideas, all coming together on one central idea for this partnership. So how can you just, like, that's a big question, that's like a whole presentation, but can you talk a little bit more about talk whatever you want to talk about in that topic? So Elise, go ahead.
Yes, so yeah, it's an excellent question. So I mean, on the positive, you know, if there are existing strengths in the region, our goal is not to duplicate that. So for example, you know, tourism, we have Greater, you know, Destination Greater Victoria, we have a very strong tourism organization that's seeking to support that industry. We do not, you know, we respect that that's their purview and support them and work with them. And so, you know, as an example. And another is that you may have seen in the list of things that SIPP does, land bank is not one of them. So land is it can activate a lot of jurisdictional questions and processes, et cetera. So we, you know, in working with members and companies and others, we defer to First Nations, we defer to municipalities, you know, to manage the land aspect. So, you know, that's something we do not do. We essentially respect that. The other piece is really having conversations and inviting kind of strategies that enter at a level that still respect, you know, the unique vision that each community has for itself. So I mean, community being a First Nation or a municipality or whatever partner it is. So respecting, say, you know, their OCP, you know, their official community plan, or their land and water management plan, or whatever it is that's you know, enshrining that, and engaging in kind of strategy and project development that looks to tap into those strengths and those visions rather than supplant them. So that's a higher level overview of how we try to navigate that.
Yeah, I can't remember. My brain is just shut off. I don't know why. But yeah, it's I think the jurisdictional thing too is when you're applying for funding or looking for monies, being able to find where people are agreeing on, and seeing how that fits into some of that funding and is also really important, right? Often, you know, I'm talking to students and they don't realize, actually, you know, if they've applied for a lot of scholarships, they don't realize how much skills they've developed through that. Because it's like, you know, when I write a proposal with our team for an RFP, it's the same process of doing grant proposal writing and stuff like that, is trying to identify those pieces within that proposal or within those eligibility requirements to check those boxes. And I think that's where the challenge really comes in, is that, like, okay, everyone does have these competing things, but where are we in agreement, and how can we leverage what's out there that's made to be leveraged?
These are some of the best questions I've seen in a webinar in probably 2 years.
This is extremely engaged group. I
This
just wanted
is-
to bring out Patricia's comment too, and then I'll let Trista ask the next question. But
Okay.
she mentioned that MOUs, so a memorandum of understanding, so that when establishing your partnerships, MOUs are in place, or it was a more formal process. So I definitely concur there. I think that you can't say enough about sort of like understanding and managing expectations along the way, as well as just like, I think it's kind of like I see this like everyone's doing different things and this organization is trying to like get something done. So if you need to put something formal in place, that could be very helpful, so that everyone is, getting what they think they need and all that. There's nothing more interesting than people dynamics, and this is just ultimately bringing a lot of people together. So go ahead, Trista.
Okay, so I'm just loving these questions, so it's hard for me to just pick some. So the next question I have, or that comes from John, is: are you interested primarily in commercial ventures, or is our social enterprise, or both?
I think
both.
I think everything. I think if it's about supporting the region, and I think Elisa said it the best, was it's not necessarily looking at supporting the strengths of the region. It's about looking at the gaps and supporting those gaps. So, if it's a social enterprise or if it's a commercial venture, if they're working towards that economic development, it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. But Alicia, I don't know if you have more to that.
Yeah, no, both. And it's, both is probably the shortest answer. I think it's interesting coming from this, the social sector, from community development before this role. I was Googling for about a year, what is economic development, to be very candid with you, because I was like, well, there's a lot of shared, there's a lot of overlap that I'm not sure that communities traditionally may see, but especially responding to a crisis like COVID-19, I think it brought folks closer together, where incentivized kind of folks who may be doing social ventures over here, and maybe ventures that had social or environmental benefits but weren't defining them, to start to get to know each other. So but yeah, back to the shortest answer, both. So
yeah, and I think things are changing in our environment too. I got off the phone with somebody, I think last week, where he's trying to start a Indigenous wellness center because he also wants to find, economic opportunities for him and his family, right? And so I was like, okay, that's cool. But then, you're doing a wellness center, so how does a for-profit kind of piece fit into that? And then how do you juggle that with working with your community? How do you juggle that with that social enterprise piece, right? So there's aspects within that would allow you to have that for-profit, but then there's other aspects where having a nonprofit is really beneficial in the way that, let's say, the wellness center might operate as a wellness center, but your counseling or your food prep or whatever that looks like, those for-profit, doesn't necessarily fall into that. So I think it, again, it just depends on what those opportunities are out there and how that works.
I'm going to ask, I think we have time for one more question, then I want to take a little bit of time for people to jump into a breakout room, because then everyone can jump in on these topics, and hopefully I'm going to get people to take notes too, so I'll send that out after. Okay, so one last question here is from Gord. Gord, I know him from a past life, actually, from my previous job. So hi, Gord, if you're listening still. He talks about how do you best, turn this video on, Gordon. How do you best engage underserved community members and Indigenous youth to contribute to the planning process? Super good question, because like you're asking for people's time, you have to make sure you're honoring it. And okay, I'm just going to stop talking. So who would like to answer, Gord?
Excellent question, Gord. And I'd say it's project by project. So, for example, for the Indigenous Prosperity Center, that's going to be the next major question. We're we're tackling. So, we've been mindful of reaching out, making sure we're reaching out at the right time so that we're honoring people's time and we're asking, getting the input that folks are providing input that has value and is related to also where we, the project stage. So, for the development of that project, we've been working with leadership. So with the corporate executive directors of our officer of a development, like a First Nations Development Corporation, and others kind of at that higher level to scope things out and get clear on who we ought to be working with. And then the next stage will be carrying out those direct engagement efforts. I will say it's also interesting too, because we have a strong social sector as well in the region. And so, and including the Social Planning Council, whose board I'm actually on, and they're doing a lot of the direct on the ground work. And so we often work directly with their leadership and count on them to bring forward, the result of their direct engagement and direct relationships with, for example, people experiencing housing precarity or houselessness. So it's a couple of different ways, but it's also something that's continuing to evolve.
Yeah, and I think part of it, like coming from private industry, it's creating a line item. You just say, this is how much we're going to spend for Indigenous youth, and I can bring that forward to my leadership when we're doing that proposal review or whatever that looks like. And I think that happens in that planning process, right? So if you're getting engaged, if you're talking to people and somebody says, yeah, I think this, and in this case, it's youth engagement. Okay, well, what does that cost? What are we willing to put into it from the private industry? And I would pressure private industry to make those commitments early on, and then just straight up say, you got to make it a line item. So you're expecting it's going to cost you 10 grand, that maybe you probably factor in 15 grand because it'll probably cost more than 10. So I think those are the things is early in that process, just make sure it's budgeted.
Okay, I'm loving this discussion. And I wanted to thank you both so much for being on this panel and sharing with us. Now, we'll probably have a little bit more time for Q&A too. So if anyone has I didn't ask my question, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and then hopefully we'll be able to get to it, or we'll answer later via email. So what I want to do now is to open up the breakout rooms. Okay, so these are the topics for the breakout rooms. So it's always a little bit of a